Two powerful women took the stage, but only one spoke with grace, empathy, and heart. When Ivanka Trump crossed the line, Jasmine Crockett crossed history. The stage lights shimmered across a polished studio floor, glinting off gold-trimmed chairs and camera lenses ready to capture every glance, every breath, every mistake. The show's opening music faded and the applause rolled through the room like a wave. It was the start of a live debate that millions were already tuning in to watch. Two guests sat opposite each other, two very different kinds of power. On one side was Ivanka Trump, calm, poised, and dressed in her signature perfection. Her expression was polite, her posture deliberate, every movement carefully measured. She had lived her life under the sharp eye of the public and knew exactly how to hold a room. On the other side sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, collected and steady. She didn't rely on charm or rehearsed gestures. Her confidence came from somewhere deeper, from years of speaking truth to people in power, from defending voices that rarely got heard. At first glance, the atmosphere seemed professional, even friendly. But beneath that calm surface, the air felt heavy, the kind of heaviness that comes before a thunderstorm. You could sense it in the pauses and the glances between them, in the quiet awareness that this would not be an ordinary conversation. The host, smiling wide for the camera, welcomed everyone to the evening's broadcast. "Tonight," he said brightly, "we have two remarkable women here to discuss leadership, responsibility, and the challenges facing everyday Americans." The audience clapped again, but not all applause sounds the same. Some were excited, some curious, others almost nervous. Ivanka flashed a confident smile. She had been in debates before, on bigger stages, under tougher lights, but something about Jasmine's calm presence seemed to unsettle her. It was a different kind of confidence, quiet, unpolished, but undeniably firm. The host continued his introduction, talking about rising prices, the housing crisis, and job insecurity. He described how families were struggling to make ends meet, how the economy seemed stable on paper but felt unstable in reality. Both women nodded politely, waiting for their turn to speak, but behind Ivanka's composed smile was a glint, a need to control the direction, to own the stage. She wasn't here just to discuss. She was here to dominate. Jasmine, however, didn't look like someone easily dominated. As the host read from his cue cards, Ivanka leaned slightly forward, crossing her legs smoothly, projecting calm power. Jasmine sat with her hands gently clasped, her focus unbroken. When the applause quieted, the host turned toward Ivanka first. "Ms. Trump, thank you for joining us. It's an honor to have you." "Thank you," she said sweetly. "I'm glad to be here." Her voice carried the same practiced warmth she used in interviews, friendly on the surface yet edged with quiet authority. Then the host looked to Jasmine. "Congresswoman Crockett, always a pleasure." "The pleasure's mine," Jasmine replied. Her tone was natural, grounded. It wasn't the smooth voice of a public relations expert. It was the voice of someone who spoke to real people every day. The first question was a simple one. "What does leadership mean to you?" the host asked. Ivanka answered first, as expected. She spoke about composure, vision, and strength under pressure. She talked about how real leadership meant staying calm, even when the world around you fell apart. Her words sounded elegant, polished, and precise. The audience listened politely, though it felt like something was missing. Then came Jasmine's turn. She began softly, "Leadership isn't about staying calm when everything's easy. It's about standing firm when things are hard, and not just for yourself, but for the people who depend on you." The audience leaned in. Her voice wasn't rehearsed. It was real. She spoke of single parents juggling bills, teachers working 2 jobs, and small business owners losing sleep over unpaid loans. For a brief moment, Ivanka's smile faltered. It was subtle, but it was there. Jasmine's words had weight, the kind that couldn't be spun or rehearsed away. The host looked impressed. The audience clapped again, this time louder. Ivanka straightened her back, her eyes sharp but still smiling. She nodded toward Jasmine, her expression saying, "Well, let's see how far you can go." The energy shifted. The crowd could feel it too. Then, as the applause faded, Ivanka tilted her head slightly and said almost casually, "You talk about hardship and leadership. Maybe we should compare what real leadership looks like." Her tone was smooth, but the challenge in her words was unmistakable. The host blinked, caught off guard. "Are you saying you'd like to debate that?" he asked. Ivanka smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Why not?" All eyes turned to Jasmine. Jasmine looked at Ivanka for a long second, then smiled gently, the kind of smile that says, "You have no idea what you've started." "Sure," she said, her voice calm as ever. "Let's debate." The audience gasped, half in surprise, half in excitement. The tension in the room turned electric. The host tried to regain control, fumbling through his cards, but it was too late. The spark had been lit. What began as a polite discussion was now something else entirely. A challenge. A test of strength between two women who stood on opposite sides of everything. Power, politics, and principle. And though neither of them knew it yet, by the end of that night the stage would no longer belong to Ivanka Trump. It would belong to Jasmine Crockett, and to the truth that refused to stay quiet. The host shuffled his cards nervously, trying to hold on to the show's outline as if it were a lifeline. He had planned for a quiet conversation, not a showdown, but the atmosphere had already shifted. You could feel it in the way the audience sat forward, waiting to see who would make the next move. Ivanka Trump adjusted her blazer and gave the cameras a practiced smile. Every inch of her posture screamed control, polished, composed, deliberate. She had been in the public eye for so long that it almost looked effortless, but if you watched closely, there was something sharper behind her eyes, something determined. She wasn't there just to discuss policy. She was there to prove she could handle anyone, even someone like Jasmine Crockett. Across from her, Jasmine sat calm and unbothered. She didn't fidget or glance around the room. She didn't even look at Ivanka. Instead, she folded her hands and waited patiently for the next question. Her calmness wasn't weakness, it was quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The host smiled awkwardly, as if pretending the challenge that had just been thrown down wasn't hanging heavy in the air. "All right," he began. "Let's start with something that matters to everyone watching tonight. The rising cost of living, inflation, families struggling to make ends meet. Congresswoman Crockett, what do you think is the biggest problem facing Americans right now?" The audience turned their attention to Jasmine. She nodded thoughtfully before answering. Her voice was low and steady, every word clear and deliberate. "The biggest problem," she said, "is that people are working harder than ever, but getting less in return." Her tone softened, but her message cut deep. Families are choosing between food and rent. Parents are skipping meals so their children can eat. Young people can't afford to move out or buy homes. These aren't statistics, they're stories. Real people. Real pain. A hush fell over the room. Even the cameras seemed to focus more tightly on her. She continued, "And it's not just inflation. It's housing prices, it's job insecurity. It's the feeling that the system doesn't care who's trying their best, only who already has the most." A few people in the audience clapped quietly, almost instinctively. Jasmine didn't pause for attention. She just kept going, her words flowing with a rhythm that felt honest and raw. "We talk about numbers on screens," she said, "but behind every number is a face, someone who worked overtime and still fell short, someone who did everything right and still feels like they're losing." Ivanka's polite smile didn't move. Her expression looked frozen, her eyes fixed on Jasmine like a chess player waiting for a mistake. Jasmine's voice softened again. "America's promise isn't supposed to be survival," she said. "It's supposed to be opportunity." That last line landed hard. The audience responded with firm applause, longer this time. Jasmine nodded humbly and sat back, but Ivanka wasn't going to let the moment stay with her opponent for long. She leaned slightly forward, her smile widening just enough to look confident, or perhaps defensive. "Well," Ivanka began smoothly, "let's be honest here. Some of the issues you're describing didn't just appear overnight. They were inherited from policies that caused instability long before now. Some people in Congress, maybe even some here, should take responsibility for that." Her tone was calm, but the jab was clear, the audience murmured. She didn't say names, but her implication pointed toward previous administrations and political figures Jasmine respected. Ivanka's voice picked up energy. "Our administration has taken strong steps to stabilize the economy. Unemployment is down. New businesses are growing. We're not ignoring the struggles. We're fixing what others broke." The host nodded cautiously, unsure whether to step in or let it unfold. Jasmine didn't react right away. She took a slow breath, then looked at Ivanka, her eyes steady and calm. When she finally spoke, her tone carried both patience and firmness. "Ivanka," she said quietly, "people don't care about who caused the problem. They care about who's going to solve it." A ripple of applause broke out. Jasmine continued before it could fade. "You say you're fixing what others broke, but what are you fixing for the mother who works 2 jobs and still can't afford childcare? What about the veterans waiting months for basic health care? What about the students crushed under debt before their lives even begin?" Ivanka blinked but didn't answer. Jasmine didn't wait for her to. "The problem," Jasmine said, "isn't just who to blame. It's that leaders keep treating pain like politics. People need help, not excuses." That last word, excuses, echoed through the studio. The audience reacted instantly. Some clapped, some cheered, some even whistled. Ivanka's smile faded just a fraction. Her hands, perfectly still until now, tightened slightly on her lap. The air felt charged. The host tried to interject. "All right, ladies, these are important points, but let's—" Ivanka cut him off before he could finish. Her voice carried a sudden edge. "With all due respect," she said, "there's only so much government can do when people refuse to take responsibility for themselves." That line hit the air like a spark in dry grass. The applause stopped. The crowd went silent, unsure how to react. Jasmine turned her head slowly, meeting Ivanka's eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even frown. She just said softly but clearly, "Did you just blame struggling families for struggling?" Ivanka tilted her chin upward, holding her ground. "I'm saying people need to work hard and stop expecting handouts." There was a small gasp from the audience. Even the host looked stunned. Jasmine's calm expression didn't change, but the energy around her did. It sharpened. She leaned forward slightly, her tone still measured. "You might want to be careful with that kind of statement," she said. "Hard work isn't the problem, Ivanka. It's the fact that some people work hard every single day and still get left behind." The crowd began clapping again, louder than before. Ivanka sat back, her lips pressed together in a thin line. The storm had officially begun. And everyone watching knew it was only the beginning. The tension in the studio had thickened like storm clouds waiting to break. You could almost feel the electricity in the air, that quiet hum that comes before something big happens. The crowd leaned in, breath held. The host's nervous smile had faded into a look of pure uncertainty. He glanced from Jasmine to Ivanka, knowing one wrong word could spark something explosive. Ivanka sat upright, every inch of her frame tense. Her perfect posture looked more like armor now. Jasmine, on the other hand, looked calm but sharp, the kind of calm that meant she was ready for a fight if it came her way. The host hesitated, then asked another question, something about the future of the economy. But Ivanka didn't wait her turn this time. "Let's be honest," she said, her tone cutting through the air like glass. "We can talk all we want about the economy, but we both know who caused this mess." She didn't say the name, but the implication hung in the air like smoke, a jab at the previous leadership before her father's return to office. It was a move she had made before: deflect, redirect, distract. She smiled faintly and continued, "This administration is cleaning up the chaos that others created. We're doing everything we can, but it takes time to undo years of bad decisions." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some clapped half-heartedly. Others whispered to each other. Jasmine didn't interrupt, not yet. She just watched, her expression unreadable, like she was waiting for Ivanka to finish laying out her case. Ivanka leaned forward slightly, confidence dripping from her words. "If people can't see the progress we're making, maybe they just don't want to. Maybe they prefer to complain instead of contribute." That last sentence landed heavy. The crowd murmured. It wasn't just a political comment, it sounded like a judgment on everyday Americans. Jasmine finally lifted her microphone, her voice low and calm. "Ivanka, I need to stop you right there." The room fell silent again. "You keep talking about who caused what. You keep pointing fingers at everyone else. But let me ask you something." Jasmine paused, locking eyes with her. "When do we stop blaming and start fixing?" Ivanka blinked just for a second. Jasmine's tone wasn't angry. It was steady, cutting through the noise with quiet authority. "People aren't asking for someone to point fingers," Jasmine continued. "They're asking for someone to listen. They don't need speeches about responsibility, and they're already being responsible. They just need leaders who'll stand beside them, not above them. The audience broke into applause again, louder this time. The host tried to regain control, but it was too late. The conversation had shifted into something raw and real. Ivanka's expression hardened. She tilted her head slightly and said, "That sounds nice, but speeches don't solve problems either. You talk a lot about listening, Jasmine, but what have you done?" The challenge hit sharp. Jasmine looked at her for a moment and then, instead of defending herself, she smiled faintly. "What I've done," she said softly, "is show up. Not on stages, not on magazine covers. I've shown up in schools, shelters, and hospitals, places that don't have cameras. Can you say the same?" The room erupted. The audience clapped and cheered, some even standing. Ivanka's smile faltered for the first time. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice growing stronger. "You say the government can't fix everything. Maybe that's true. But what it can do is make sure the people who are struggling aren't blamed for their struggle. You can't call that leadership, you call that neglect." Ivanka took a breath, her jaw tightening. She gave a small laugh, the kind meant to sound confident but came out thin. "You're twisting my words, Jasmine. What I meant was," Jasmine cut in smoothly. "No, Ivanka, what you said was that people need to stop expecting help. That's not twisting, and that's quoting." The audience gasped and then applauded again. The energy in the room had completely changed now. Jasmine wasn't just defending herself, she was exposing something. Ivanka leaned back in her chair, visibly annoyed now. "You know, this is exactly what's wrong with public debate. You can't say anything honest without being called heartless." Jasmine didn't miss a beat. "Honesty isn't the same as cruelty," she replied. "And being called out doesn't mean you're right. It just means someone finally stood up to you." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The host tried to speak again, but no one was listening anymore. All eyes were on the two women, one trying to control the narrative, the other refusing to let her. Ivanka's voice sharpened. "You act like you care about people more than anyone else, but let's be real. This is about politics for you." Jasmine shook her head slowly. "No, Ivanka. This is about people who don't have your last name. People who can't call the White House if something goes wrong. This isn't politics for me, this is personal." That line hit like a wave. Even Ivanka's expression softened for a second, but only briefly. She recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "Well," she said coolly, "maybe if more people worked as hard as my family has, they wouldn't need to rely on others." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. Jasmine stared at her for a long moment and then said quietly, "You mean people like your father, who inherited millions?" The crowd erupted again, this time louder than ever. Some laughed, others clapped, and the tension snapped into full-blown drama. Ivanka opened her mouth, ready to fire back, but Jasmine didn't give her the chance. "The truth hurts, doesn't it?" she said softly. "Especially when it comes from someone who's lived the struggle you only talk about." The applause was deafening. The host's voice faded under the noise as he tried to move on. But it didn't matter. The debate had transformed into something unforgettable. What had started as a polite discussion had turned into a battlefield of words. And neither woman was backing down. Everyone watching knew that from this point forward, nothing about this debate would stay calm again. The room was already buzzing from the last exchange. Every person watching and in the audience and behind the cameras could sense something was about to snap. The tension wasn't just in the air anymore. It was in every look, every pause, every shallow breath. Ivanka Trump leaned back in her chair, trying to mask the storm brewing inside her. Her confident smile had cracked just slightly at the corners. Jasmine Crockett sat opposite her, composed and unshaken, her calm presence only adding fuel to the quiet fury simmering on Ivanka's side. The host tried to cut through the heat with a new question, his voice a little too cheerful. "Ladies, these are strong opinions, but let's move forward. What do you think is the key to unity in America today?" For a brief second, it seemed like things might settle down. Jasmine nodded slowly, ready to answer. But Ivanka got there first. "Well," Ivanka said, her voice smooth but her tone sharpened by irritation, "unity starts with accountability. People need to stop blaming the system for their own failures." The audience murmured again. Jasmine looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. But Ivanka wasn't done. She leaned closer to the microphone, her words slicing through the silence. And maybe, she said with a deliberate pause, some people, especially those who come here from other countries, should consider whether they really belong here if all they do is criticize it. Gasps rippled through the room. The sound was immediate, loud, and raw. A few audience members turned to each other, whispering in disbelief. Others sat frozen. It was the kind of statement that instantly changed the temperature of a room. Cold, divisive, and unmistakably personal. Jasmine didn't move at first. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak right away. Her silence spoke louder than any outburst could have. She looked at Ivanka, not with anger but with disappointment so deep it almost hurt to witness. When Jasmine finally spoke, her voice was steady, controlled, but every syllable carried weight. "Did you just say that?" she asked softly. Ivanka didn't flinch. "I'm saying," she replied, "if you don't appreciate what this country offers, maybe it's not the place for you." The room erupted in murmurs again. Some gasped. Others shook their heads. It wasn't just a political comment anymore. It was personal. It cut into something deeper. Jasmine took a slow breath, the kind that steadies a person before they choose their next move carefully. "Ivanka," she said, her tone still calm, "this country doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to your family. It belongs to everyone who calls it home, whether they were born here or built their life here from nothing." The applause that followed wasn't the usual polite clapping. It was passionate, defiant. The audience knew they had just witnessed a line being crossed, and someone standing tall against it. Ivanka's expression hardened. "Don't twist my words," she said quickly, her voice tight. "I'm talking about people who tear this country apart with division." Jasmine's reply came instantly, unshaken. "Division doesn't start with people asking for fairness, Ivanka. It starts with people who think fairness is a threat." The crowd erupted again. Every word Jasmine spoke landed with precision, not shouted, not exaggerated, just deeply true. But then, Jasmine leaned forward, her tone shifting. Quiet, but sharp as a blade. "You talk about unity, but everything you say divides. You talk about leadership, but you hide behind your father's name. Tell me, Ivanka, what are you really standing for?" The host froze. The cameras zoomed in. The tension was suffocating. Ivanka's eyes flashed with something close to anger. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice tight and incredulous. Jasmine didn't back down. "You claim independence, but every word you speak sounds like a defense for him. Maybe you should stop acting like his echo and start acting like yourself." The audience gasped again. The energy in the room had shifted entirely. It was no longer a debate. It was confrontation. Ivanka gave a forced laugh, but it sounded brittle. "That's cute," she said, coming from someone who can't even control her own side of the aisle. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, smiling faintly. "Control isn't the goal, Ivanka, truth is. But I get it. That's not something your circle is very comfortable with." That was the spark that lit the explosion. Ivanka's eyes widened, her composure cracking completely. "You have no idea what my circle is," she snapped. "You wouldn't last a day in it." Jasmine's voice dropped lower, calm but searing. "Why would I want to? It's built on privilege and fear, not service and strength." The studio erupted again. The host tried desperately to regain control, waving his hands, but it was too late. The moment had gone beyond politics. It had become personal truth versus polished image. Ivanka stood her ground, but something in her face shifted. A flash of panic, quickly buried under a tight smile. She tried to reclaim the upper hand. "Maybe people like you just hate success," she said. "You attack anyone who has built something bigger than yourself." Jasmine met her gaze, unwavering. "No," she said quietly. "I just refuse to call arrogance success." The silence that followed was deafening. Every camera caught the moment perfectly. Ivanka's clenched jaw, Jasmine's calm defiance, the audience frozen in disbelief. And then Jasmine added one final line, her voice soft but steady. "Leadership isn't about money or power, Ivanka. It's about understanding pain, even when it's not your own." That line hit like thunder. The audience rose in applause, some even shouting Jasmine's name. Ivanka didn't respond. Her eyes flickered toward the host, then to the floor. For the first time all evening, she looked unsure. Cornered not by aggression, but by truth. It was the moment everyone would remember. the point where polished poise collided with raw honesty. And in that clash, Ivanka Trump's confidence had cracked just enough for the world to see what was behind it. The applause was still echoing when the host finally tried to steady the show. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the chaos he was trying to contain. The cameras were rolling, but everyone knew. This wasn't just television anymore. Something real had cracked open. Ivanka Trump sat motionless for a moment, her eyes fixed on Jasmine Crockett. Behind her flawless posture, you could almost sense the heat rising. Frustration, embarrassment, maybe even disbelief. She had been challenged many times before, but never like this. Never by someone who refused to play her game. The host cleared his throat. "All right, let's bring the conversation back to solutions," he said, glancing nervously at the producers. "Congresswoman Crockett, what message do you have for Americans watching tonight?" Jasmine didn't rush to answer. She looked around the room, at the faces of the audience members still murmuring, at the stunned crew, even at Ivanka, whose hands were now clasped tightly together. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, but every word carried quiet fire. "My message," she said, "is simple. Don't let anyone convince you that your pain is your fault." The room fell completely still. There are people working 2 jobs, raising families, doing everything right, and still barely getting by, Jasmine continued. They're not lazy. They're not ungrateful. They're just tired of being told that their struggles are a choice. She paused, letting the silence stretch long enough for the words to sink in. "And when someone tells you that you don't belong here," she said softly, "remember, this country was built by people who were told the same thing. They didn't leave. They stood up." The audience clapped again, this time louder, stronger, united in sound. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Her voice grew firmer. "Unity isn't built by silencing others," she said. "It's built by listening, even when what you hear makes you uncomfortable. But lately, too many people confuse leadership with control. They think strength means shutting people up instead of lifting them up." As if on cue, a soft crackle came through the speakers. Then suddenly Jasmine's microphone went dead. Her lips kept moving, but no sound came out. The audience looked around, confused. The host froze, unsure what to do. Ivanka looked toward the stage crew, her expression unreadable. Jasmine tapped the mic once, twice, then stopped. She understood what was happening, and so did everyone watching. A few voices from the audience began to shout, "Turn it back on!" The tension was thick, the kind that makes even breathing feel loud. Ivanka leaned slightly toward Jasmine and whispered, though the cameras still caught it. "Careful," she said. "You're walking on dangerous ground." It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. The audience gasped. Jasmine turned to her slowly, her face calm but her eyes fierce. "Dangerous ground," she repeated quietly. "I've been standing on that my whole life." The host tried to jump in, waving for a technician to fix the microphone, but it was clear. The silence was no accident. Ivanka folded her hands neatly again, forcing a faint smile. But it was the kind of smile that tried too hard to look unbothered. When the microphone finally came back to life, Jasmine didn't waste a second. She spoke with a steady, unwavering tone. "This," she said, gesturing subtly to the mic, "is exactly the problem. When truth gets uncomfortable, someone tries to turn it off. But you can't mute reality. You can't hide it behind power." The room erupted again. The audience cheered, clapped, even whistled. Ivanka's eyes darted toward the cameras, her calm facade slipping further with every second. Jasmine continued, her words flowing now like water breaking through a dam. "People deserve leaders who aren't afraid of hard conversations. Leaders who don't flinch when they're held accountable. That's what tonight should have been. Not a stage for blame, not a platform for pride, but a reminder of what real leadership looks like." Her voice softened, filled with emotion. "Because at the end of the day, we all want the same things. A home we can afford, a safe place for our families, a chance to live with dignity. But those things don't come from arrogance or power. They come from empathy. And if we lose that, we lose everything." The applause was overwhelming now. Some audience members were on their feet. Even the host looked moved, nodding slightly as Jasmine finished. Ivanka sat in silence, her expression unreadable. For the first time that night, she didn't have a comeback. She looked down at the table, then slowly stood. Without a word, she straightened her blazer and walked off the stage. Cameras followed her as she disappeared behind the curtains. leaving Jasmine standing alone under the bright lights. The crowd didn't stop clapping. The energy in the room shifted. What had started as tension had become something like clarity. People weren't cheering for sides anymore. They were cheering for truth, for courage, for someone who didn't back down when the lights got harsh. Jasmine stood tall, waiting for the applause to fade. When it did, she looked into the camera and said her final words. "Remember this," she said quietly. "No one has the right to decide who belongs. Not in this country, not anywhere. You belong because you're here, and because you care enough to make it better." Her tone softened even more, almost like she was speaking directly to one person. Don't ever let power make you forget your worth. And don't ever let fear make you silent. The audience erupted one final time. The host's voice came through shakily, trying to close the show, but everyone knew the night was already written in history. That was the moment the curtain fell, not just on a debate, but on an illusion. The world had just seen two women face each other in the spotlight, and only one walked away standing taller. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won an argument. She had exposed something deeper. That truth once spoken out loud can't be turned off. Not even when the mic goes silent.